As we get through another week of coronavirus lockdown in the UK, we have more information coming to light about the state of the rental industry overall. And actually, there are a few conflicting pieces of information, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it just a lot of talk. So let's start off with some information from the National Landlords Association, recently merged with the Residential Landlords Association, so now they're called the NRLA. And they have reported that 74% of landlords have had some contact from tenants who are having difficulty with paying the rent and want to see what their options are. Now, of that 74%, there's a much smaller proportion that physically can't pay the rent or have had to agree some sort of payment arrangement short term. But a lot of people have made contact, and part of that is to do with the way these measures were initially announced. I think, unfortunately, there was a perception in the marketplace around mortgage holidays and also around rental payment holidays that, you know, this was just going to be a bit of a free-for-all, that everybody could get away without paying some stuff for a couple of months. As the detail has come out, lenders are taking a very responsible approach to this with landlords and with mortgage holders. If you need to agree a payment holiday, you agree a payment holiday for up to 3 months. And also, they're very clear on the impact this will have to your repayments on your mortgage going forward. And that's the same approach landlords are taking with tenants. If a tenant needs to agree a payment holiday right now, that's perfectly reasonable for them to agree that in this particular situation, because they may be facing job loss or reduced hours, or they may have to make claims under the self-employed persons scheme. But there also needs to be a conversation about how payments are agreed to be recovered for the long term as well. Now, this is in contrast with a very eye-catching headline or claim from the London Renters Union that has called for a suspension of all rent payments for the next 3 months. That's kind of fallen on deaf ears. What the government has said in relation to that is, yes, there should be flexibility. Tenants should continue paying what they can afford to pay, bearing in mind that the government is providing a lot of support in this regard as well. And they've been very clear. They've published some information specifically around benefit claims, saying that the housing proportion of the claim must be used towards your rent. You can't be claiming this and then not using it to pay your rent. That's an incorrect use of the scheme. Also, the National Students' Union is in calls to make sure that students aren't paying for accommodation they can no longer live in. Now, this is something that I agree with entirely, because my position as a landlord, having some students in my portfolio, is if they've needed to go home and all of their education is moving online, there's no reason for them to be paying for my property to live in there anymore if they're not actually physically living in there. But the way to handle this is to ask them to serve notice in the normal way, pay out their notice period as well, and agree something that's mutually agreeable through both sides, and make sure that you arrange any removal of their belongings in a way that is acceptable under the social distancing measures. Now, one of the things that's not acceptable, and this is once again a bit of a misinterpretation of some of the things out there, and the government has been very clear on this as well. There are some students choosing to stay in their student accommodation because it's either not feasible for them to move home to their family home, or they don't want to move home at this stage. If they are staying in their accommodation, the government is saying that they are still paying out student loans, that grants are still being paid if they qualify for bursaries, or maybe there's a PhD stipend. All of these things are continuing. So if that funding is still in place, that particular student should have the means to pay the rent and should be continuing to pay the rent as well. That's a message that's going out there at the moment. At the moment, the key thing to do really is continue with the attitude that if people are in financial difficulty and need to have a conversation with you, as a landlord, you should absolutely be offering some flexibility to keep people in their homes with a roof over their heads at this point in time. That's not only what you're legally required to do, it's also absolutely the right thing to do in this situation as well. But do make sure that any conversations you're having with tenants, or any conversations that you're authorising the lettings agent to have on your behalf, do have an eye to what happens for the long term to allow the tenant to recover from any of those arrears that might build up at this particular point in time. And that's because these are payment holidays. They're not a suspension of rental payments. They're not a forgiveness of rental payments. And that's the same thing with mortgages as well. So we've got to think about short term, taking care of people, making it affordable for them to stay where they are short term, longer term, making sure that it's also fair on both sides and it's in a position where people can recover from these things. If you do need any help in sorting through the maze of this, if you need any advice on how to deal with tenants or how to frame something in terms of a payment arrangement, maybe deal with a lender if you need to request any arrangements from there, if you're confused about the different claims being made and maybe how some of the legislation is applied, we've got information, we've got coaching, we've got tools available to support you. Please just get in touch and let us help you through this difficult time.